So thank you, Dr. Cha, for that marvelous introduction. And thank you all for the great honor of being invited to speak with such a distinguished audience and in such an important venue. The Korea Foundation is rightfully admired for its impressive work in helping not only Koreans, but the world to understand and appreciate more deeply the richness of Korean culture. Now, I come from a culture in America that compared to yours is brand new. It's in some ways as if we are just starting out. We have so much to learn from cultures that, like yours, are built on so many centuries of well-grounded thought, tradition, art, and science. I hope on this trip to learn more myself about those very subjects. And rather than be at the podium today, I wish that I could be out there in the audience, being taught by one or more of you about the marvels of your history and current affairs. But in addition to bringing Korea to the world, another laudable purpose of the Foundation is to bring the world to Korea. And it is in that mode that I speak with you today. My message, however, is not just for Korea or for Asia, but for even my own country back home. And it is that our world needs more than ever to educate students in the liberal arts. Now, since the time that I chose this subject for my remarks, the world suffered the early death of one of the most influential figures of the turn of the century, Steve Jobs. Perhaps no one has been more closely associated in the public's mind with technology, entrepreneurship, and success. He was seen as living proof of how technology itself can transform lives and cultures. But Steve Jobs himself saw things differently, as he explained when introducing the iPad 2 by claiming, technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with the liberal arts that yields the results that makes our hearts sing. I love that quote. It says so much that is important to policymakers, educators, and those seeking the most relevant possible education for themselves or their children. Now, since even many Americans are unsure what the term liberal arts means, let me explain my own understanding of it. To embrace the liberal arts is to understand education as a humanistic endeavor, the purpose of which is not to train students narrowly to tackle their first jobs, but to prepare them broadly to live fuller, more effective lives. At Williams College, we want our graduates, as they head out into the world, to be able to think critically, to write and speak persuasively, to solve problems creatively, to respond to art deeply, to reason logically and quantitatively, to be led by strong moral and ethical instincts, and to understand not only themselves and their own cultures, but people and cultures of great variety. I have the good fortune to serve as president of one of the most highly regarded liberal arts colleges in the United States, and I am humbled to succeed a line of distinguished predecessors. None was more famous in his time than Mark Hopkins, who in the 19th century served as Williams president for 36 years, which I can assure you is slightly longer than I intend to hold my own position. It was he who gave us the following stirring description of the focus of a liberal arts education, which is the mind of each individual student. And I quote, "We are to regard the mind," he said, "not as a piece of iron to be laid upon the anvil and hammered into shape, nor as a block of marble in which we are to find the statue by removing the rubbish, nor as a receptacle into which knowledge may be poured, but as a flame that is to be fed, as an active being that must be strengthened to think and to feel and to dare and to do and to suffer." In these few words, Mark Hopkins cut to the core of education at Williams and at similar colleges and universities. What he calls the mind, of course, includes what we would call the heart and even the soul, the whole of a human being, which is so much greater than the sum of the parts. He reminds us that a humanistic education refines students' thoughts and feelings, their sense and sensibilities, that an educated person must act as well as reflect, and that engagement with the world will involve risk and expose us to trials and disappointments. These are the elements that make up a life, and that the most effective education must help prepare students for. Now, how does that happen? Let me show you. This short video captures well the main way that education occurs at Williams.
And is that, you know, it just tends to steal the beat of the song. That's not a disaster. Okay, this looks okay, the beat splitter.
I came into Williams with a sense of adventure necessary to kind of reach out and pursue these different things. And Williams gave me every opportunity, every chance to kind of reach out and say, hey, I want to do that, hey, I want to try that. And so I was able to try, you know, marine ecology, I was able to try physiology, I was able to try medicine.
For me, in the end, the thing that really made me decide to become a scientist was an undergraduate research experience. Williams offers something very special, and the teaching part and the research part come together here in the lab in a way that's unusual.
Right now, I don't think I'm ready to be done learning physics, and that's the main push to doing this thesis research with Professor Majumdar.
The principal opportunity is the summer when the college, I think in its wisdom, has decided to invest a lot of resources into a very active program where there are nearly 200 students in the sciences alone every summer here doing research. Increasingly, it's not just sciences.
I'm writing a food history of Williams and how Williams sources food, the dining halls, how students ate.
The research that I'm working on at Professor Majumdar's lab deals with laser spectroscopy, and so the main idea is we're shining a laser beam through atoms and trying to see how they respond.
This summer, Andy will be completing a project that was started by this year's thesis student, collecting the data, analyzing it, and hopefully getting to the point where we're writing up the project for publication before he graduates and heads off to graduate school. I've had roughly 20 students who have done one of these year-long honors thesis projects in my time at Williams, and this is much more the model of what goes on in a graduate institution where you have graduate students doing this kind of work. The only difference is in this case, these are undergraduates.
Why would that?
Because of the cell, I think. I mean, I don't think it's that ugly if you hold it over here. There's no way I would have accomplished what I accomplished here without the aid of many, many students. Just about every one of them is either a PhD scientist now or in a program on their way to a PhD. We send lots of students to a place like MIT or Harvard for PhDs, and I think having the liberal arts college background for 4 years where you can study broadly, but at the same time have these really unique opportunities is a great way to prepare students.
Professor Majumdar likes to say that one of his goals with his thesis students is to prepare them in such a way that when they walk into any lab really in the country, that on the very first day they could be a productive part of that research group.
Here's 1 molar phosphate buffer at pH 7.6. And I just had
So we really have a group feeling, and that, you know, science gets done best, I think, in that way. It's about being comfortable enough to voice an idea.
This whole research experience has been good for me in a lot of ways. It's a huge confidence boost, especially as I look forward towards graduate school.
After Williams, I came to New York City, and here I'm working at New York Presbyterian in the emergency room. I think my research at Williams, or at least the flexibility that I had to kind of dabble a bunch of different things, gave me the confidence to jump into a new situation that I might have the potential to really love and say, hey, let's give it a shot. So I came here and I immediately fell in love with it. I love medicine, I love my patients, I love the ED.
What I think a place like Williams does really well, not just through our science and physics courses, but in everything, is it really sharpens their intellect in the sense that they're problem solvers, they're thinkers, and they have a sense of confidence about being able to solve problems. And doing physics, just like so many things, successfully, is not about solving a problem that you've already seen before. Life is about, and doing academic science is about solving problems that you've never seen before. So it's about learning the tools that will allow you to solve the next problem that you've not seen before. And I think that's something that we do particularly well at Williams, and I think over and over again we've seen students who have grown into that kind of a scientist.
So, let me say a few things about that piece. In fact, Notice it has my favorite quote, "Science is about solving problems you've never seen before." And as a scientist, I think that's one of the most beautiful things you can say about science. And in fact, one of the things I love about the whole piece is how it counters a common misperception that the liberal arts consist only of the humanities, or humanities and social sciences, and not the natural sciences and mathematics. In fact, the sciences and math are essential to a well-rounded education. They represent some of humankind's greatest intellectual achievements, and no one can function effectively in the world without the skills developed by practice in those fields. We actually require Williams students to pass at least 3 courses in those fields to graduate. Some 12% of Williams students major in mathematics, and repeated studies have shown that a disproportionate number of science PhD holders in America earn their undergraduate degrees from a liberal arts college rather than a university. The video also shows how much education in a liberal arts setting takes place outside the classroom. We see the professor and his student working side by side in the laboratory, grappling with ideas informally, even playing football together. You can see learning of many kinds taking place in all those settings. What I love most about this piece, though, is how well it shows that the flame that Mark Hopkins referred to is sparked by the arc that leaps between the poles of professor and student. Both are powerfully charged, and the interaction between them is electric. Another famous saying in American higher education was not by Mark Hopkins, but about him. James Garfield, before he became the 20th President of the United States, once said, quote, "The ideal college is Mark Hopkins on one end of a log and a student on the other." This beautifully simple characterization reminds us that education always has been, and I believe always will be, a social activity. At Williams, we have distilled that idea down to its purest form in the 60 or so courses taught each year in the tutorial format. Adapted from the tutorial model used for many years at the University of Oxford in England, these courses afford faculty-student interaction of a whole different kind. And one more video will show you how this works.
Reading it as a low capital to asset ratio, even small losses can bring the bank to the edge of insolvency. When such a bank takes write-downs on its equity, it is often forced to rapidly shrink its balance sheet.
What tutorials allow you to do and force you to do is think on your feet. It's like improvisation in music. I actually studied music and I always had difficulty with improvisation. I followed the notes. I have a feeling if I went back to it now, I might be a little bit better at it, because in a tutorial, I have no idea what the students are going to come up with. That's the case in a lot of classes, but in tutorials, it's square. It's to the nth degree. Tutorials are quite unique to Williams. They developed from an idea of a previous president who himself had studied at Oxford, the idea of Mark Hopkins and the log, where you have the teacher on one end of a log and the student on the other end of the log, and they're engaging with each other in dialogue. And I think until tutorials, we hadn't had quite such a vivid embodiment of that ideal.
I mean, I just thought the whole idea of working on Odysseus as a figure of the log, of your lead, I thought that was a really interesting concept.
A tutorial is a class of no more than 10 students. The class is divided into pairs. Each week, the professor meets with each pair. And for each meeting, one of the pair writes a paper, usually a 5-page paper, and the other partner writes a critique of that paper, and that forms the basis of the discussion.
Enlightenment dissolves away, this is a good thing about enlightenment, dissolves away the injustice of the old inequality of unmediated mastery. So I think
basically you've been studying German literature from 1784 to say up until 1947.
In tutorials, students learn how to learn from each other more than relying on the professor to profess. The professor is pretty much silent for the first 20 minutes, half hour of each meeting. Through the awkwardness of not having a professor's voice fill that silence, they learn that they need to think and learn and listen from each other.
It's nice to be like in dialogue with another student's ideas rather than just the text. Like today we were doing the dialectic of enlightenment, which is wonderful and dense. And by reading this in a tutorial setting where it's just me, the professor, and another student, I can so much more readily admit that here's this part that I didn't understand.
The tutorial is a protected space where we come to realize that we can trust each other to critique gently but thoroughly, to listen carefully.
If you have a raw idea, then the professor or your partner can sometimes put it more eloquently than you can. So as a result, that helps you really develop your own ideas and sort of not be afraid to go out on a limb.
It's exhilarating. It's so much fun when just all of a sudden ideas are popping out of our collective heads, the three of us. Tutorials help students work in conversation with others. I think that's really important in later life, whether it's in a classroom or in the marketplace or in the courtroom or any kind of workplace, because it helps them listen as well as talk.
It's both helped us grow as students and just as people.
One of the things I like best about tutorials is that they have given everyone a voice. Tutorials are very empowering for individual students. And for me, that's how change really happens at an institution, one individual at a time.
So what a rich experience for both students and faculty. Tutorials are also a distillation of one of the most important innovations in higher education, one that is credited to Mark Hopkins, who turned college teaching on its head with 4 short words when, in his senior course on moral philosophy, he asked his students, "What do you think?" Until then, college instruction consisted almost entirely of rote learning in either recitation or translation. But with that question, the classroom suddenly came alive. The line between that moment and the ones you've just seen in this video is long but clear. One could jokingly say then that providing a liberal arts education is as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1, assemble the most promising faculty and students. 2, provide the facilities and support that they need. 3, get out of their way. This is actually a fair description of the job of a college president. The challenge, of course, is in the details. Let's start with assembling the students. If you think about it, higher education may be the only service for which the quality of the experience of those who purchase it is affected by who else is purchasing it. Your experience of driving a Hyundai Equus is determined exclusively by its engineering and the quality of its construction. But your educational experience, especially at a liberal arts college, is affected greatly by your fellow students. The smarter, more conscientious, and more creative they are, the more lively will be the conversation in the classroom, the dining halls, and the dormitories. The wider the backgrounds and experiences of your fellow students, the more interesting and nuanced the conversation will be. And the more widely talented your fellow students are, the richer your campus culture will be, intellectually, artistically, athletically, and so on. As a result, the admission process at Williams and at colleges like it is complex. No single test can identify which applicants will make the most of their time at the college and will contribute most to the education of each other. In our deciding which applicants to admit, the most important characteristic by far is academic promise. We are an academic institution, first and foremost, but admitting only the applicants with the highest SAT scores would not bring to campus the variety of backgrounds, experiences, interests, and talents that maximize the education we are able to offer our students. We are fortunate enough at Williams to have each year so many academically outstanding applicants that we can assemble an intellectually vibrant entering class that is diverse in all the ways that contribute to its members' educational experience. I am sometimes asked, what's the one thing that can get me or my child admitted to Williams? The answer is that there is no one thing. You need to be academically very strong, that you need to bring one or more other characteristics that the college needs. You might be a fantastic oboe player, but that year, the college symphony has plenty of oboists, and what it really needs is a great trombone player. There was no way for you to know that back when you chose to take up the oboe. So applicants and their parents should not see admission to one particular college or university as a judgment of the student's worth. It's like assembling an athletic team. The most effective basketball team cannot be made up of all centers or all forwards. It needs guards and some who specialize in either offense or defense. And the second best center in the world won't be picked by a team that already has the best one. I know that it's hard for many families to resist the admissions mania that builds up around selective colleges and universities. But admission decisions are not a measure of a person's worth. And as much as I want the strongest students to come to Williams, there are a great many colleges at which one can get a truly wonderful education. It is important to focus here for a minute on two kinds of student diversity, socioeconomic and international. It's vital that a Williams education be available to students from families of all income levels. Low-income students bring unique perspectives to the dialogue that takes place inside and outside the classroom. And without them, the college cannot fulfill its important role as an engine of social mobility. Williams is fortunate to have the financial resources to admit all U.S. students without regard to their ability to pay, and to promise to meet 100% of their demonstrated financial need for 4 years. In other words, if your family cannot afford to pay the full fee, or even if they cannot pay anything at all, that is not held against you in the admissions process, and we'll make up the difference. A similarly generous financial aid program is in place for international students. By our reckoning, any student admitted to Williams can afford to attend. So highly do we value these principles that we spend tens of millions of dollars each year in supporting them through our spending on financial aid. This is by far the fastest growing part of the Williams budget. And when the college was recovering from the global economic crisis, financial aid was the only budget item that grew at all. Everything else was reduced, including our spending on personnel. And that's how important affordability is to Williams. Another significant form of diversity on campus is international. Our graduates will live and work in a world that's increasingly interconnected and that cries out for greater international understanding. One of the ways that we increase students' understanding of the broader world is to expand the number of international students on our campus. In recent years, we've doubled that number, so that non-U.S. citizens now make up more than 6% of the student body. In addition, many of our U.S. students either live abroad or have had extensive experience overseas. Williams is a much more international college in every way than it was even a decade ago. A student body this academically powerful, this broadly talented, and this wonderfully diverse deserves a faculty that's equally exceptional. We thus recruit our faculty from the finest graduate programs in the country and the world. But we don't just want their top PhD students. We want their top students who also have a passion to teach in the intensive, personal way that we do at Williams. Many graduate students seek careers that will involve perhaps some teaching, but focus mostly on research. And that's all right. The world needs great researchers. The Williams needs faculty who, in addition to staying creatively involved in their field, take deep satisfaction in engaging those students on the other end of the log. In referring to the log, James Garfield meant to evoke a kind of rustic simplicity and to imply that college infrastructure was of little importance. If that might have been true in the 19th century, it certainly is not now. In the current age, the logs that our faculty and students rely on include laboratories, studios, performance spaces, libraries, internet servers, playing fields, and residences designed to encourage the kinds of interactions among students in which they help educate each other. At Williams, we have just begun construction of an $82 million library and technology center, a far cry from a log, but essential to 21st century learning. So having assembled our faculty and students and provided them support, you'll recall that the third step is to get out of their way. Now that might sound like chaos to you, but if so, it's a creative one. Faculty set the curriculum and evaluate the quality of each other's teaching with great thoroughness and care. Students, within certain broad constraints, choose the courses they are most interested in and manage their own academic honor system, in which exams are taken without supervision and breaches of academic good conduct are handled by a panel of their peers. You might be sitting there thinking, Adam, isn't this all impractical? The answer to that question is yes and no. It's wildly impractical in terms of preparing students for a specific first job in a particular field. But remember, we are instead trying to prepare them for all the challenges and opportunities of life. And even in terms of our graduates' careers, the best preparation in a world changing as rapidly as ours is the development of broad understanding and of skills that can be creatively adapted to the evolutions and even the revolutions that will continue to take place throughout the professions. This was put with particular eloquence by another of my distinguished predecessors, John Sawyer, who at his induction as Williams president in 1962 said, "No one can pretend to more than a guess at what today's students will be called upon to comprehend. This much we do know, that no training in fixed techniques, no finite knowledge now at hand, no rigid formula that might be given, can solve the problems whose shapes we cannot yet define. The most versatile, the most durable, in an ultimate sense, the most practical knowledge and intellectual resources which they can now be offered are those impractical arts and sciences around which the liberal arts education has long centered." President Sawyer, meet Mr. Jobs. What was true in the mid-20th century is even more so now in the 21st. Our present moment is marked by insecurity. Jobs seems shaky and scarce. Financial markets swing uncontrollably. Political structures increasingly lack public confidence. Uncertainty breeds fear, and fear drives us to seek safety, or at least what appears to be safe. In such a climate, it's understandable that students, families, and policymakers are drawn to educational models designed to increase the chance of getting that first job. But our nations and our world need the next generation to be capable of so much more. What we require throughout our cultures, including throughout our economies, are leaders at all levels with vision, with creativity, with problem-solving skills, with moral purpose and integrity, with the ability to communicate effectively, and with the capacity to understand foreign cultures and empathize with people who are different. We need, in short, the kind of people the liberal arts at their best help produce. I can't help but think of roles played by some Williams alumni. Steve Case, class of 1980, who by launching the company America Online was the person most responsible for bringing internet access to the masses. Steve claims he failed the only computer science course he took at Williams, but the entrepreneurial skills he began to develop there helped change the world. Telford Taylor, class of 1928, served as chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials after World War II. Williams has no law courses, but he credited his study of history and politics there as integral to his growth. Janet Brown, class of 1973, credits her work at Williams in American Studies and lessons of teamwork she learned as member of the tennis team, as instrumental in her career in government service, including now as Executive Director of the U.S. Presidential Debate Commission. Marissa Reddy Randazzo, class of 1989, whose interest in psychology was sparked at Williams, has gone on to lead the U.S. Secret Service's effort to scientifically identify individuals on the verge of committing mass violence. Stanley Foster, class of 1955, led the effort that rid the world of smallpox, even though Williams has no courses in medicine. Many thousands of other alumni have contributed to their communities and professions, and almost all of them credit some portion of the depth of their lives to their liberal arts experience. Now, I am not arguing that all colleges and universities in the world should look just like Williams. We represent but one model, and an extreme one, given our small size, residential emphasis, and complete focus for all students on the liberal arts. There exist, of course, many models, large and small, public and private, completely liberal arts, and hybrid. The hybrid model, which combines general education with pre-professional training, is being experimented with in universities dotted around the globe. Each culture needs to develop the system that best suits it, and to meet the need of its full range of students, each culture ideally would offer a variety of models. But I am convinced that the temptation in this time of economic, social, and political uncertainty to reduce higher education to professional training holds great peril. Now more than ever, we need graduates with the vision, skills, and understanding to tackle the challenges we face. Students and parents must be brave enough to look past their immediate concerns to embrace for themselves a better future. And we, educators and policymakers, must do all that we can to support them. Only then, according to Steve Jobs, can the world's heart sing. Thank you.